Hey everybody, welcome back to Avalon episode 2. Now, like I said last episode, this is going to be focused pretty much entirely on that big interchange that is not only connecting 3 of our main highway sections together, right behind the central station point, but also providing access to the grid from all 3 directions. So it needs to be relatively large, and the goal here is to make something that looks pretty interesting from above. So it needs to have kind of a nice design to it, but also it needs to be pretty compact so we can fit all of our buildings and everything else around it, because this is in the middle of downtown and I don't want to take up too much space with all these on and off ramps. So kind of an interesting challenge before us, but I'm very excited to show you guys how this thing turns out. I had a lot of fun building it, of course. And if you're not a fan of these highway building episodes, don't worry. The next episode, like I said in the first episode, will be finally jumping into building the downtown area, adding in some buildings, and starting on the detailing and expanding of our city. So obviously, getting into the actual design of this interchange, there is a very large spiral as sort of the base of our interchange. The reason why I went with this, other than thinking that it looks pretty neat, I guess, is usually you would see in a large urban interchange like this a need for a whole lot of different locations on the grid or the roads below, all needing to come and meet with some highway, whereas in our case, we really don't need to have a whole lot of different points connecting to the grid. We mostly need to have a whole lot of different ways to get from different parts of different highways. So we have, 3 different highways kind of coming off of this interchange, and all 3 of these need to have access to really just the same point on the grid. I didn't need to have like more than one entry point onto our grid below. So this means that we can kind of use the same off ramp, and if we just kind of spiral it in the middle here, we can actually get pretty much every single highway from all different directions to have a little access point to this spiraling ramp, and then this single ramp can go off into our kind of downtown grid area. So this is nice because it means we can really tighten this whole thing up and keep pretty much all of our ramps in the inner part of this loop, and this really does allow us to have plenty of space to build buildings and things in the future, which is kind of neat. Now, what I do want to mention, and I thought that I was going to talk about this the first episode, but I didn't really have time. Just kind of something that I learned by doing a lot of highway building in this game that I thought was kind of an interesting little tip that you guys might enjoy. You might notice that when I'm building new segments and I'm trying to design different arcs and roads and off-ramps and things, I rarely ever draw out roads using the actual curve tools and things. What I typically do is I'll draw like a single segment off of the node that I'm trying to work with, and usually it's just like a 10 meter segment or something smaller than 10 meters or 10 meters exactly, so that you don't get more than one node out of your segment. And then from there, I'll use move it to move the end point and the start point to the locations that I want it to be at, and then I'll do some height adjustment and then use move it to create the curves. And the reason why I do this instead of just kind of drawing straight off the highway like a lot of people will do is you have a lot more control over where the actual nodes get placed. So you'll notice on these off ramps, especially on the outside where I have these big swooping exit ramps, I don't want to have a whole bunch of different nodes like scattered across this big arc, because each node kind of tweaks with the overall gradient of the curve, and more importantly the gradient of the decline coming down. And what that means is, even if you like smooth it out really well and you separate the nodes pretty well, you're going to have a little bit of bumpiness in your curve and bumpiness in your decline on the way down. And that's something that's just really, really hard to wrestle with if you have a whole bunch of different nodes. But if you only have nodes where you absolutely need them, where you want to have a change in the the decline level, or change in the I'm trying to say the change in the decline level. I don't know, like the derivative of the decline level. I don't know what you would even call that, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like, unless you really need to have a node there, just try to have as few nodes as possible, because it really makes it easier to create nice smooth curves. That's basically what I'm getting at. And I used to do this just a little bit in like very specific use cases, like pretty much only designing interchanges, but really, at this point, I've found myself pretty much always doing this now. So you might even just notice, like, anywhere that I'm building roads in the future, I pretty much always just like draw a little road segment off to the side and then just move it and move the road segment where I want it. I don't really actually use the road tools that much anymore. So I don't know, just a little tip, I guess, but I do use this quite a bit. So you might notice this a lot in future parts of the series, but I think it's really useful, and I don't see a lot of people doing it this way. And I always see people asking me, like, how do you get such smooth curves, and how do you get your interchanges to, look as nice as they do, or have, the same gradient all the way across. And this is pretty much it. This is exactly what I do to design all of these things. But anyway, now we're getting into sort of an interesting part of this build. Now, I did say earlier on that we didn't need to have a whole lot of different, pieces of our grid area connecting to this interchange, but even still, I wanted to be really, really careful about how we enter the grid from the highway, because if we just have like a straight, on-off ramp, like, single road that connects straight to the grid in one point and creates a traffic light, that's going to be a major bottleneck. We're going to have all kinds of traffic coming off the highway and from every single direction, all going into one single intersection, and that's going to be a total mess, which I don't want to deal with. So the first big thing with coming off the highway is I want to have all of the entry points onto the grid area be basically just right turn only onto the road. So it basically meets at an angle. There's no intersection whatsoever, or there's no light, rather. There is an intersection, but I use the Traffic Manager ++ to, or I think it's just called Traffic Manager now, no Traffic ++, that's like old school, but whatever. I use Traffic Manager to ensure that there's no traffic light and that they can only turn right, and what this does is it basically means that none of the traffic coming off of the highway is going to get stuck at a light. They can immediately turn right onto this road, and then that kind of disperses them into the grid a little bit, and then from there I'm just kind of careful with the next intersection, and in this case it happens to be just a T intersection, so a little bit more of a quick light, and then they can, split off in their, their directions and go about their way. So just things like that. Really, you just want to be careful about connecting to the grid, because whenever you're going to have a lot of traffic coming on one single road, you want to be really careful not to just throw it straight at a big intersection that's going to have all kinds of trouble with lights and, long timed lights. Especially if it's like a four-way intersection, it's going to cause a lot of problems. So this is my solution to that. And then on top of that, I want to design this sort of smaller interchange on the lower half, and it's a little bit hard to describe in words, but really what it is there's a single one-way road going across this kind of sunken highway, which is actually just a split avenue that continues on both sides, so you can actually go back and forth across this avenue. It's not like a one-way thing. But there is a one-way road that goes all the way across, and this is actually the road that feeds into the intersection, or into the interchange, rather. So I wanted to have like a direct avenue that basically just turns into the road that turns into the highway. And I think this is pretty common also in big cities. I've noticed that a lot of times whenever you need to have a lot of traffic entering a highway from a single point, instead of just having, some single like one lane exit ramp or whatever that goes up onto the highway, you'll have an entire avenue that just turns into a 3-lane road that then becomes the highway. So that's how I did the entry point here. And at this point, I'm just making kind of a little interchange at the bottom and avoiding having a traffic light immediately afterwards, but rather giving options where you can, basically it's treated like a second interchange. So you can, get back onto the road or, go about your way without having to hit another light at this point here. And the neat thing about this is it also ties into that other interchange that we built in the last episode. So this interchange still needed to have an entry point, which we didn't have yet. So I have a second split coming off that same avenue that turns into the entry to the big interchange. And that second split then arcs around and goes into that interchange. And the neat thing about that is, since these are so close together, really the shortest path could go either way. So it seems like a lot of the cars could take either direction, depending on if they're trying to go south out of the city or north further into the city. And I think that'll be hopefully very useful. Hopefully we don't have too many cars taking one or the other, but I think that the way we designed it should disperse traffic a little bit and keep that nice and tight and not have too much congestion on either side. But in the end, as you can see, I mean, it is a very, very dense interchange. There's not a lot of wasted space. And you can actually see right here in particular, this is a spot that I really wanted to avoid bringing roads into. I wanted to be able to have buildings on this avenue. So even though it would have been nice to just kind of swoop this whole exit ramp area out and closer to that avenue, I tried to keep it really, really tight and up against the main spiraling interchange. And it kind of ended up in this neat looking little outer section that kind of comes out from the main spiral. So anyway, we're pretty much at the end of the episode. I know it was kind of a shorter episode this time. Like I said, I just wanted to finish up the road infrastructure before we get on to the urban design and starting on the city itself. So I hope you all enjoyed this shorter episode on the large interchange in the middle. I'll leave you guys with some cinematic shots so you can see the final result. And be sure to check back again next Saturday for episode 3, which will, of course, be all the urban design and all the fun stuff like that. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.